My guest today is part of the acclaimed directing duo Zhang and Knight and their Oscar qualified short film A Bear Remembers. Now, their film won the Canal Plus Prize and Best European Film at Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival and the Jury Prize for Drama at Aspen Shortsfest. The film has since appeared at major international festivals, including Telluride, Hollyshorts, and the Bolton International Film Festival. And this film blends lyrical, visual storytelling with cultural depth. And A Bear Remembers is a haunting meditation on generational memory, myth, and the quiet, invisible forces that linger in the spaces between. Now, A Bear Remembers marks the narrative debut of Zhang and Knight, a London-based directing duo whose soulful work explores themes of cultural identity through folklore. Now, they're known for their award-winning music videos and commercials. Their distinctively dreamlike style has earned international acclaim, and this particular film represents their transition into long-form storytelling, and they are currently developing their debut feature project. Now, A Bear Remembers has earned praise for its poetic storytelling, visual elegance, and emotional depth, and the film stands out as one of the year's most captivating short narratives. So let's welcome one half of Zhang and Knight, Zhang himself, and their Oscar qualified short film, The Amazing A Bear Remembers, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us and giving us a little platform to speak about our film. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Now, do I call you Zhang or do I call you Linden?
You can call me Lyndon. Zhang is more a professional name. So yeah, Lyndon is great.
All right. Well, Lyndon, your film has such an incredible mystic magic to it. Where did the idea of the story come from?
So the initial seed of the idea was actually it was a music video pitch, and it was much simpler. It was the idea of all the spirits leaving the planet, and they would all walk through the woods in a sort of procession, and then they'd leave Earth and go into space. And we, as you said, music videos, that's our sort of that's where we come from. And we pitched this thing for years. Like every year, every brief that would come in, we would try and get it made, and nobody would want it. And it was really quite haunting, this idea of the spirit sort of fading and being quite mortal and quite fallible. So we just kept returning to it. And then I think after a few years, Hannah and I both said, "Look, I think there's more mileage in this than just a music video. I think it could be a short film." And at that point, we started to develop elements. It became a bear, not just a generic spirit, and the world started to get built. And we were just like, yes, it is a vessel for this much deeper idea. So, yeah, it had a journey, but it was in germination for maybe 4 or 5 years beforehand.
Well, that pretty much happens with a lot of short films and even features for that matter of just trying to find the right narrative to bring forth to the public. But you explore cultural identity in your film, and there are two generations. There's the young boy and the old woman, but you also give a view of the wide, your beautiful landscape, but with the added modern touch of the wind turbines littering that beautiful landscape. Why were these contrasts important to the overall story?
I think, it's interesting, and we've spoken about this before, but when we first had the idea, it was very abstract and it was very untethered to any real place. Hannah and I saw it more like a sort of a piece of folklore or something, really like not in a real world at all. And our whole pre-production development process was about trying to give it more heart and more soul. And I think in that process, we kind of had to drag it into a more recognizable universe. And so that was a universe with wind turbines, and that's a universe with drones. And I think every time we would bring it more into a real world that people could recognize, the story got a little bit more resonance, and it kind of removed it from this very detached, almost. I mean, I don't know if you know like Parajanov and some of the Soviet folktale filmmakers from like the 70s, but that was the starting reference, and we love those films, but they don't necessarily have a lot of emotional heart because they are super abstract. So um, the the more we brought in this technology, the more it not only landed the idea and made it feel grounded and real, but as you say, it also then started to bring in this idea of change in the landscape, the history that we leave behind, and we just realized more and more yeah, this stuff is kind of essential to creating that contrast and telling that story.
Yeah, where the young boy, he's flying his drone, he's getting footage, and then a news crew shows up and they just kind of blow him off. And it's almost like if they treated him as if he said he saw Bigfoot or something, and they were like, they were looking for the same thing he was. Where is that sound coming from?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, he is actually based on a very dear friend of ours, who I don't know, he doesn't know. I don't know if he'll watch the film one day and see himself in it or not. Um, but there's a really very earnest and very sincere quality about the character of Peter, and he's very face value. He's like, I've got this amazing footage, and this is something very precious and really valuable. And I think because he is this slightly earnest young man who's maybe a little bit anarchy and a bit geeky, he kind of gets dismissed. And I think for us, we were always looking for a way into the story. How do we invite the audience into this world? And we thought, well, you need a character like Peter who isn't sort of secretive or shy, because otherwise how are you going to get brought in within a 20-minute film and introduced to all these elements? So I think that Peter was the thing that made the script really click. For a long time it was hard to invite people in and to do the world building we needed in the first 5 minutes before you then get on with the story. So yeah, having someone who is like, watch my footage, I fly a drone, like very in your face, and sort of trying to force the world to engage with him, even though the world doesn't want to engage. That was really crucial as a sort of an access point.
When Peter came across Ebba, because he had walked upstairs in that building and found Ebba and her husband, the moment that he showed her his drone footage, the look on her face. And what I loved about it was is that the audience doesn't know if the bear is a threat or if the bear is somewhat of could be a happy memory, but the look on her face kind of gives us a feeling of, was this something scary? But it really took her back to the time when she was a little girl, correct?
Mm. Yeah, and which is exactly as you've said, it's bittersweet. I think there are things about memory which are amazing and things that you want to sort of linger in, but it's everything is can be both. It can be painful and it can be a sweet thing. And I think it's almost a muscle memory, sort of something, something which is like programmed into her, buried decades ago, is the sort of the history and her community's history. And this is all, it's all fictional. It's a culture Hannah and I made up based on lots of little British folklore things. But in our version, there was a fire many years ago, and this village was burnt down, and all these very traumatic things, which the audience may or may not pick up on all of the stuff that's woven in. It is quite dense, how we're kind of giving information, and some of it's very subtle. But you get this sort of tapestry of memory. Things like you say that Ebba is like they're painful as well as magical and amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when I found it sad that the bear was looking for the village that was once there but now gone. And he was just roaming around aimlessly. And for Ebba, I think it kind of broke her heart for her a bit to tell him that the village no longer exists.
Yeah, she
And
tells. Oh,
no,
sorry. No,
no,
go
no,
on.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that she tells him once that the village isn't here anymore, and then towards the end of the film, the bear says, "If we could only find the village, maybe we could remember more." And then she doesn't correct him. She doesn't bother because it's this sort of loop. And um, yeah, I think for us, the idea of a spirit almost having a touch of dementia was really moving.
It
Yeah.
it it was, and and see that's the thing with, and I'm glad you brought that up. When it comes to dementia patients, they now say don't correct them because what are you actually correcting? Because you're actually
Mm.
causing yourself more despair and heartache and difficulty because they're not going to remember. And if you correct them, the same question's coming tomorrow.
Hmm.
And so it was so touching that she didn't correct him. And and I found the bear's demeanor to be, he was so, he was calm, he was endearing, he was kind, and even with the design of the bear costume, I love that scene where he wraps his arms around Ebba
Mm.
because right then there's this decades long bond that still remained after all of those years when he did that, and then the look on her face was, there was just this this memory of the joys in the past.
Yeah, it was weird. We had the bear design in our mind for a long, long time, and we worked with Kate McConnell, who is an incredible costume designer and art director, to bring it to life. Um, but it was very hard to do any blocking or planning in advance for that scene with Eva and the bear because we had this amazing dancer called Rihanna and she's inside the bear costume. So we did rehearsals with Rihanna and Annie who plays Eva and Lewis who plays Peter, but they're three human beings and there was nothing very magical to these rehearsals. It was like, oh, okay, this is what the bear does, and just pretend right now it's going to be great. And then on the day, we saw the costume in full for the first time. We'd seen it sort of throughout the months coming together, but as a whole thing on Rihanna, and she had become then this huge thing. The bear is really tall. It's like 6'4", 6'3". And suddenly Annie, who plays Ebba, was tiny and she felt like a child. And the bear was like this huge monolithic creature. Um, and suddenly things which hadn't really worked very well or satisfyingly in the rehearsal, like Rihanna hugging Annie from behind, suddenly you have this enormous bear hugging Ebba, and Ebba becomes a child. And I think Annie did such a beautiful job of then playing against the bear in the scene. When she's dancing, she has this like wonderment in her eyes, which just feels so childlike, and she's kind of tapping back into something 60 years ago, and she's physically transported somehow. So it was one of those things that on set we were like, oh, okay, this is great. This is what we imagined, but we just didn't know if it would feel like that for the longest time. Yeah, it was quite scary.
One of the beautiful things about this film, and it's so subtle. It is so subtle, but it's so profound in this film. So, like, if you take the scene where, the bear and Ebba, you know, she remembers the dance, and the bear remembers part of the dance, and he apologized for not remembering the next steps, and there was just this private joy going on, and Peter gets to watch and experience all of this with them, but it's at that moment where we're seeing this silent quiet torch being passed from Ebba to Peter, because when Ebba, who knows when or where, whenever she whenever she passes, Peter is now the one carrying the torch that the bear truly does exist. And then maybe one day he will try to find that bear again.
It's definitely left very open-ended. There's this moment, and actually Peter is interesting in that scene because when Hannah and I first wrote it, we had Ebba and Peter approaching And then on the adjacent hillside, they saw the bear, and Ebba said to Peter, I think you should stay here. So in the first draft, Peter was really a witness, but he wasn't in the scene at all, and he wasn't part of it. And again, maybe in a feature, maybe that could have worked with more time, but I think in a short, it was too like abrupt to just drop your character and then move on to new characters. So Peter, in the end, was part of the scene as a much more present witness. He still is mainly observing old rituals and old things. Um, but it then gave birth to this moment that Hannah and I both love, which is where Peter says, "Look, no more noise. We've done it," and he sort of uh, signals that the driving mystery of the film has now been resolved. It was the bear creating the noise, and now we can get on with our lives. And there's this real like naivete or sort of unawareness on his part of it's like yes, one thing is resolved and another thing is maybe lost forever and it's sort of two endings and it's left quite ambiguous, is it because of him being young that he doesn't yet understand that, is that a moment that in 50 years time Peter will look back and think, oh my goodness, that is wow, wow, that was also heartbreaking and so sad and you have this little moment of disconnect between him and Ebba in the last beat where Ebba's in this different emotional space to Peter. She is kind of bereft at the loss of some kind of history, and Peter is a bit confused. He doesn't fully understand it yet. So yeah, that's a nice thing. And yeah, maybe the sequel in however many years is
Yeah,
Peter going to find the
yeah,
bear.
I have seen a few short films where I'm like, okay, now I want to see the sequel, and because what I love the idea of folklore. I don't see a whole lot of folklore. I think I've only seen two films this year that kind of explored folklore, and it's a breath of fresh air. I will tell you that. And so I love the storytelling. I love the mythical element of this film. But there's a very interesting contrast. The bear was the one banging the pots together because even when Ebba and Peter and then Ebba's husband were all in that little room and she grabbed those pots and she's like, does it sound like this? Well, you can hear it off into the distance, but she knew the rhythm. But since the bear was the one banging the pots together because the sound was soothing to him, but that same sound was troubling the village below. I thought the contrast was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we tried to create this world where because you know what, we never wanted to say that this little settlement here in the hills is an evil thing, and it's man versus the past, or it's man versus nature. We really didn't want to be so black and white or binary. So it wanted to be the sense of that this noise has all these different layers of meaning. Um, on one level, it's a nuisance, it's an annoyance, and on another level, it's something sacred and something ancient. Um, and that is often true. Sometimes a town really needs a new road, but they find old ruins, so they can't build the road, and it means that the town is cut off from the big cities, and then their economy is hampered. And it's like, oh well, those ruins are kind of annoying for stopping people being able to commute to the local city. It's complex. It's not really black and white of the past is this good force and modernity is a bad one. And hopefully that was kind of conveyed in the film that these different levels to it.
Well, the
Um,
sound was rhythmic in nature, which for the townspeople could be part of being a nuisance. But after a while, the body becomes used to it and then just eventually tunes it out, which I kind of noticed with Ebba. She wasn't bothered by it. I think deep down she knew, but when Peter
Mhm.
showed up and showed her the video, then she was immediately transported back to when she was a child. Explain the significance of the rhythm.
The rhythm was we wanted to just have something which was just music the whole way through the film that you don't know when the film starts, but you're hearing I guess the core elements of the film score. And it was really we tried all sorts. We tried something more complex, and we tried something which was much more spaced apart. And it is really hard because also, as well as the townspeople finding it annoying, we don't want the audience to be driven away like, oh, this is awful. Um, so for us, we listened to a lot of folk music, a lot of ancient sort of British Isles music, and this sort of like dum 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 just becomes a beat you can just dance to. And Hannah and I went to a folk dancing center in North London, and a lot of the music was just sort of tapped out by these older women who were dancing there, and we were like, yeah, okay, great, it can be really simple and primal, and that's perfect for this. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so touching to see Ebba and the bear meet, even more so when the bear actually remembered her.
Mhm.
And I got to thinking about that, and here you are way way out into the countryside, and the bear, in a way, it's almost like, oh, I saw Bigfoot, but only you may have one person, you may have very very few who have ever come across this bear, and for him to remember her after decades was so touching. And to think that, and in my mind, this bear would continue to live on much more into the future than Ebba will. And so I thought that whole scene when he actually remembered her was so touching. I loved the dance between both of them because it brought warm, happy memories back, which was another great contrast in the film. And you bring up something, you just said something about, like ruins and villages that no longer exist. There's the camera shot when they were at like the top of this hill in a clearing, I guess. The camera shows below there is these old uh, English ruins down below that once was a village. And then off into the distance, you actually see the town. Where did you film this at, and how challenging was it to film in that location?
So we filmed this in South Wales. I grew up on the Welsh borders, so I do know Wales quite well. And it was scary from the offset because Hannah and I, when we wrote the script, we knew we needed a small town at the foot of the hills. And that it didn't have to be Wales, it could be anywhere, but we knew that these kind of 20th century towns exist in Wales because there are so many old mining communities there. And it was scary because growing up in Wales, I know how awful the weather is. It's terrible. You think the UK is a small country, but Wales is a microclimate in the same way that Scotland is a microclimate. And February, March in London looks very different to February, March in the Welsh Hills. So um, we were scared. We did embrace it. I think we went into it. Hannah and I recce'd a whole bunch of times. Um, and each time the weather was completely different. Sometimes you couldn't see 4 meters because of the fog. Sometimes you were being blown off the mountain. Another time you were sunburnt. So we just sort of said, look, we have to embrace this. We have to be flexible in our shoot days and in terms of how we structure things. But there were two things that were challenging. You have Annie, who plays Eva, and she is a brilliant, very tough person, but she isn't as young as everyone else. So these very vertical sort of bits of hill were not easy for her to navigate. Uh, but even harder was the bear itself because the bear costume takes about 45 minutes to put on and to kind of zip up everything and pop these buttons. Yeah, it's a process. You would never think it, but it all moves so beautifully because it's strapped to the body in certain ways, so it responds. very sort of synergistically. So 45 minutes to put the bear on. The head is very really heavy. So if you imagine like Rihanna's head is here, but the bear head is like way up here. It's much higher to give it this strange proportion. So poor Rihanna is going around with like, I don't know, 20, 30 pounds of weight on her head, and it's raining. It's all made with sheep's wool, so it's natural fiber, which is getting heavier and heavier every 10 minutes. It's notably heavier. So it was it was really stressful. And at a certain point we said, Rihanna, we should take a break. You should take off the bear. And she said, guys, if I take this off, I'm never putting it on again. Like if you want to shoot, we're gonna shoot. So we just kind of pushed through, but it was, you've seen in the film, the weather is spectacular. We had fog, we had rain, we had clouds. It was really good to us, but it was incredibly stressful.
There was this shot where you see the clouds start. They're like what I would call kind of a whispering type clouds, and they're in the background of the hill. So they're
Mm.
coming up from the hill to the valley, and I'm looking at that thinking, you cannot do that in post. I'm thinking that is real, and so to me it was, for a lot of people it may not mean anything, but I just thought it just added a little bit to the film because with the scene when Peter was playing with his drone in the beginning, the sun
Mm.
was shining, the sun was out. So how many days did it take you to film this short?
We had 3.5 days. It was quite a tight turnaround. Um, we had the half day was shooting a lot of drone footage, and we'd intended to do a lot of wide shots on that day of the hills and the valley, but the fog was so thick. I mean, you couldn't see 5 meters. It was the densest fog. So we were like, okay, that scratch that. We can't do that. Um, and I think midway through the shoot, I think we flipped 2 days around and we were calling all our locations like, oh, the weather's going to be terrible. We have to shoot indoors in that window. Yeah, yeah. There's two moments where you see clouds. There's that moment where they're going up the hills where, like you say, it's like a wispy cloud, which was
Yeah.
amazing. And then there's a moment when they're dancing on the hilltop, at the sort of climax of the dance, and you cut to a wide shot and the clouds are blowing over the hills. And in the script, we knew we wanted something magical there, but we didn't know what it should be. We just knew it wanted to feel otherworldly. And we wrote in that a sort of heavenly golden light sort of shines down. And we had on standby like a little LED panel, and Hannah and I were like, "Oh, this is so small. It's you're never going to feel that it's something magical." Um, and then we saw the clouds swooping in, and we were like, "Okay, that's it. That's that's going to be the thing." Um, yeah, and yeah, very
I
lucky.
love that. I love that. And with the scenes with the bear, did you, because it took 45 minutes to put that costume on, did you film all the bear scenes in one day?
No, we poor Rihanna, she had to put it on 3 different days. Um, because some days we would just do like a single shot of the bear on the hillside. Um, and actually the hardest stuff for her to film. So if you imagine the way the costume is built, a lot of the weight is on the back of it. So there's a whole scene where they're all sat together on the ground. That was the hardest thing for Rihanna because just to sit upright with all that weight, it's like you're doing an ab workout. Um, and so she's there like, like tensing everything. Um, and you can hear it in, well, her voice isn't in the final film. The final film, it's Kieran Hines playing the bear, but Rihanna did do the temp track on set, and everything is like, oh, you can feel her whole body working against the weight of this suit, and she did a beautiful job because it looks very serene in the final picture. But yeah, that was very tough for her. She's
Well,
amazing.
tell me about the design of the face of the bear because
Mm.
what I really liked it. And one of the reasons that I liked it is that visually, so if you visually look at the face of the bear with no sound, no dialogue. There's no expression.
Mm.
Your narrator who's doing the voice of the bear was so spot on perfect that when you listen to him talk, it allows the audience to look at the bear in a different way. And I found myself looking directly in his eyes because the voice that you hear is really just there's just this it just creates this visual emotion when you're watching it and hearing it all come together. So I love the fact that you didn't create a face that would have a particular look. It's not like, you don't want to create a face that has a smile or a scowl. You've kept it very well, it was absolutely neutral. But where did the idea and the design just on the face come from? I mean, was there other characters that you've seen that you kind of fashioned it from?
No, well, we initially, so back in the day when we were pitching this as a music video, we were really into folk costume and, from Eastern Europe, from the Balkan countries, from the UK, there's a long history, as there is everywhere, of folk costume. And those elements are often somebody in a big suit and then a little mask on the face. And often they're scary, often they're a bit frightening. Um, and I think throughout the process, Hannah and I said, okay, in order for the bear to feel very anchored into this world, there has to be a real logic driving everything. All the design decisions have to make sense. So we created a background story. It's not in the film, but for our own knowledge, we said the bear is probably an extraterrestrial creature that came here thousands of years ago and has just wandered the hills. And when the local villagers saw him, they thought, oh, it's big and it's kind of hairy. I guess it's a bear. And so we said maybe they had fashioned a mask for him to wear to cover over something much more alien and much more unpalatable and strange and otherworldly. And so the face itself, it's kind of like a woven wicker basket face, which is just, okay, what are the materials that the local people would have had access to? Okay, they're poor farmers, so they would have had mud and they would have had straw. And Kate McConnell, our designer, she started to bring in all these other materials and we really fashioned a whole logic. There have to be flowers and bits of material in his fur because he's been wandering for so long. And maybe 100 years ago, people would brush his fur, but that hasn't happened since the village burnt down. All these little logic things. He has long alien fingers, and again, that's because he's not of this world. He's from another planet. So, you know, none of this is in the film, and nor should it be. We don't want people thinking about the alien bear, but we do want people to feel like there's a whole lot of history and lots of little things, and that they're not questioning it. That there's just a logic that backs it up. So. Um, and there were things that were a discovery process. One of them was ears. If you have ears on something, it suddenly becomes really cute, and suddenly it was like a children's character. So, um, and the expression was hard because it was like if you do anything, if the eyes are too small, then it looks really cute. If they're too big, it's watching you, and that's creepy. And really, that was like a whole R&D process, and it was just push and pull on a very small level. Um, I think at one point he did have ears, and then we just ripped them off because it was like, no, these don't work. I think he has something very small, like some little sort of nubs in the final version. But yeah, it was organic. It was really there was no way to be like, let's draw this design and then let's just make this and it's perfect. It really was hacking away the whole time.
I just love the depth of thought that went into that because when I looked at the bear, for some reason my mind kept thinking, is it derived from a sloth? Because of the slow movements that the bear would make. But no, I thought the design was absolutely fantastic, perfect for this film. There's so much went into it. But how did you come to cast your film? Because Anna Calder Marshall, uh, you know, we're thinking back into the 70s of Wuthering Heights, and then and also the young Peter who is Louis Cornet. Where did you find them?
Yeah, Annie was the hardest in a way because when you're making an approach for an older actress, you're not really asking for tapes, because they've done their dues. They're so, when you have that much experience, the brilliance of the actor speaks for itself. So we couldn't ask for tapes. It had to be a very direct approach and just us saying, "Hello, would you like to play this part?" But so the thing with Anna Calder Marshall is that since Wuthering Heights, which was, I don't know, 50 years ago or something, her and her husband, who was also a very prominent British actor, they decided to just do theatre and stage because they hated the attention um, of of being in the public eye in the way that screen work puts you kind of into the foreground. So they've just done stage, and many friends of ours said Anna Calder Marshall, it's got to be. And we said, but okay, but is there any footage? Can we watch anything? And they said, no, you had to be there. 2016, her at the National Theatre, or 2020, her at the Barbican. It was all these moments that had gone and were not captured. So Hannah and I were like, okay, we there's really not much screen material to watch of Annie, but people we trust so much are saying it's got to be her. And so we were just like, okay. And these are people really close to us who were just like, who said when they saw her on stage in certain productions, it changed their world. She was unbelievable. So we just said, okay, Annie, would you like the role? Um, and very happily she agreed. We went to her house and we met her and spoke. And she said, look, my only thing is my mobility isn't so good these days. And we said, it's fine. We'll do anything. And she was just amazing. So Annie was great. Peter, yeah, the role of Peter with Lewis, we did auditions, we saw lots of actors. He instantly embodied this character who was at once annoying, but in a very innocent way. And that's not Lewis at all. Lewis is very charming and lovely. But in so instantly getting someone who you felt like a little bit sorry for, and you also were a bit irked by, and he just found this place where it was a 3D human. It wasn't like a caricature. So um yeah, he was very instantly, we were like, yes, this is Peter. And then Kieran Hines, who plays the bear, he was last, and in a way that was maybe easier because the film was shot already. There was a temp track in there. So first Rihanna on set did the voice, and then I did the next version of the voice. Not ever with the intention of my voice being the voice, but throughout the process, you said earlier something about the bear feeling really kind of present emotionally and really connectable. And what we found in the edit was I would start recording things on my phone, lines of the bear, but whispering, almost like ASMR, really close. And what that did when you were watching the bear, whose face you can't see because it wears a mask, suddenly it was right here in your ear and it was intimate and it was almost a little bit psychic, like it was coming from inside your head because it was so quiet. And we looked at, we looked at so many actors, and in the UK we have great actors. So there was a long list, and we just kept coming back to Kieran, and we were like, the thing is, he is this great, imposing presence of a man, but there is something so tender and so lovely about uh, everything he does. In each performance, there's something also tiny and micro and macro within it. So we reached out to Kieran and we said, and him and Annie have done stage work together before, and sent a little message just saying how much we felt he would be so perfect for the role, but also that Annie would love to get to act with him again one more time, even if it was miles apart and months apart. These two performances would come together in post and would be combined. And Kieran said yes and just did this beautiful. I can't even with the bear with. To be honest with everyone did such a beautiful job, but it was that was like the final piece, and we were like, wow.
Yeah, it was wow. It was wow. Now the older gentleman that played Ebba's husband,
Mm.
was that special effects makeup?
Yes, there is some really good special effects work just to create this sort of burn texture. Um, as a throwback to their childhood when the village was burnt down. Um, he was initially in the mix for one of the background extras in the church. And we saw his face in his photo, and we were like, he's so compelling and moving. And Arn is a character who doesn't have any lines. He's mute. But just in this still photo, we just were so moved by him as a man. So we just said, look, I know you weren't up for this part, but would you consider it? And yeah, he did a lovely job actually. What a star.
Yeah, the when I looked at that shot, I'm thinking this is incredible special effects makeup because it was so authentic. I kept thinking either that's real or somebody has an incredible talent in this area. So well done on that side of things. So, what has been the overall reaction from the audiences that have seen this film?
Um, it it's been really beautiful, I have to say. I mean, like you said, we premiered in Clermont-Ferrand, and since then we've been around the world with it. And uh, people will, I mean, even people like yourself will ask us questions which just demonstrate such a deep connection to the film, and we just think, wow, you noticed that, and that's amazing because we put months of work, I mean, years of work into Bear actually. And you just assume what you kind of have to look at it as you're making it for yourself, and maybe someone else will like it as well. And um, yeah, it's been an amazing reaction. A lot of people have been very personally moved or affected, and people saying, "Oh, I grew up in such and such a community, and it doesn't exist." And it won't be like an ancient community like Ebbers. It'll be like maybe a small new town build from the 1970s that was demolished recently. But I think maybe there's something quite universal about the film that speaks to this idea of loss. Interestingly, we were in Egypt a few weeks ago for a festival. Um, and everyone thought it was a horror film because it was foggy and misty, and they said, "Well, we don't have fog in Egypt." So, it made everything so creepy. And we were like, "Oh, that's just what the UK looks like."
Sometimes we forget that other parts of the world have no idea what that stuff looks like.
Completely. But I mean, also, having a bear, when we went to Aspen and we went to Telluride Film Festival in Colorado, and all the locals have seen bears, and they they got a different level of meaning because we chose a bear for the film because we wanted something which was British, but also that doesn't exist here anymore. And bears have been extinct for hundreds of years. They still live on in our coats of arms and in our pub names and our place names and family names, but we have no more bears because they were hunted to extinction. And that was a layer of meaning that I think that a lot of Americans didn't necessarily instinctively pick up on, because you guys do have bears still. So that for us made the bear even more perfect as a choice of creature. And I think it's fascinating that you know nuances from countries to country shifts, but there is still something about the film that can connect through still, and it's very moving. Yeah, it's really lovely.
Yeah, we have bears and we have fog. I mean, it was foggy yesterday, it was foggy this morning, so yeah, we know exactly what that is. But that's just really funny to hear that come from a part of the world that's like, we don't have that. You
Yeah,
know? And
yeah.
and and I always wonder sometimes with film festivals when they take certain films and they put them in a particular category, and I'm like, that's the wrong category.
Yeah, it's very true actually. Whatever you're programmed next to does really inflect how it feels. And I think in Egypt there was something kind of quite horror next to our film, and that maybe put people in a horror mood. I don't know what it was.
Yeah,
Um,
when I see films that win, let's say a sci-fi award or a horror award, I'm like, but that's not what that film is. And it's
yeah,
just so funny. Then the
yeah.
film gets labeled, and so it's just the craziest thing I've ever seen. But I understand that this film is leading you into long form storytelling. What is the allure of doing a feature film?
But that was so when Hannah and I first met, that was what we both wanted to do, and Our all our shared references, everything is cinema, long form features. We've always known we wanted to make one. I think why do we like it? I think doing a lot of work in music videos and commercials has been a fantastic experience, but it feels like you're only painting with like half the colors. You can't express everything you want to express because you don't have control over all the elements. So there are some ideas that you want to explore that you just can't explore because there isn't that same level of bit depth of bandwidth to kind of to play with. And I think for us, there's a lot of themes that we would love to think about and reflect about, like, Bear deals with cultural erasure, but you can't do that easily in a music video, certainly not an advert. So we were like, we need all of these different tools and different paint tubes to be able to do that. For us, what we love about a folklore piece like Bear is folklore and spirits are such a great allegory for expressing other things, or they're kind of like a vessel that you can package something else into. You have spirits which represent grief, spirits which represent sexual discovery, or different facets of identity. So for us, I think our first feature film will probably be set in a similar mythic version of modern Britain, where spirits roam and they are a vessel containing another idea. And it's like, even when you see Miyazaki's films, Studio Ghibli, you can think you're having like a fun adventure film, but then packaged deep within it, there's maybe something else. And it's like, aha, got you. There's something, it becomes about a topic you maybe would never have wanted to watch a film about because it sounds too heavy, but the access point is through fantasy and through something escapist. And I think Del Toro does that beautifully. There are filmmakers who do that, and it's the most amazing thing when you're kind of tricked into engaging with something. But you're here for like the fantasy level, and then beneath that there's something really deep. And I think for Hannah and I, we were like, yes, it's that's what we would love to be able to do. And it can be entertaining, but it can also be um, deep, and it can be transformative as an experience. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And now this film here is Oscar qualified.
Double Oscar qualified. Yes, it is. Yeah,
You're double Oscar qualified.
we are. Yeah,
Now,
we won. Oh, sorry, I was going to say we also won the grand jury prize at Edmonton a few weeks ago. Um,
so are you BAFTA
so
qualified too?
yes, we're BAFTA qualified as well.
Wow, congratulations on that. I always have to keep my eye out on the UK films because I know that they can be double dipping into the awards season. So but that is great to hear because I really truly love this film because it's so out of the box storytelling. I love the the metaphors within the film. And ladies and gentlemen, a bear remembers. This is a haunting meditation on generational memory, myth, and the quiet, again, invisible forces that linger in the spaces between. Now, this film is set in a remote village nestled among hills steeped in myth, and the film follows Peter, a curious local boy who becomes fixated on a strange sound echoing through the valley. His search leads him to Ebba, which is played by Anna Calder Marshall, an elderly woman whose long buried childhood memory of a legendary bear spirit is suddenly reawakened. Now, as Peter shares found footage with her, the boundary between past and present begins to blur, calling forth something ancient and powerful. But just when I think that the short film genre was caught in a rut, A Bear Remembers brings a fresh, out of the box perspective in storytelling. And we need more filmmakers like Zhang and Knight to bring new stories to tell, but bold visuals as well. Again, I love this short film. You feel the curiosity of the young boy, you feel the emotion and memory of Ebba as she thinks back to a time of meeting the mystical bear. Now, the wonderment is expanded when Peter gets to relive Ebba's memory and encounter with the bear from her childhood. A perfect story where we see one generational memory handed over to the new generation. And Linden, I want to thank you so much for giving me the honor to watch your film and experience its magic firsthand. And much success to you and your whole team on your Oscar and BAFTA journey.
Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure and to get to speak, but also to have such, like I say, so thoughtful and detailed and just brilliant questions to get to answer. So it's been a real joy. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very, very welcome, and I have to say too, and add to it that the cinematography and the colorization of this film is absolutely superb, and this is a film that everyone needs to see. And for all of you young filmmakers out there trying to figure out what kind of film you want to make, well, watch A Bear Remembers and step outside the box and create something very, very different that sets it apart from everything else. And A Bear Remembers does just that. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.